What if we were completely wrong about mental illnesses? This is the question asked by American psychiatrist Dr. Georgia Ede in a groundbreaking book, Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind, which has been translated into French by éditions Souccar under the title Nourrir son cerveau, soigner son mental. In her book, she dismantles the fragile architecture of psychiatry centered on medication, replacing it with a much more fundamental model, nutritional psychiatry. For Dr. Ede, depression is not a lack of serotonin. It is an energy crisis of the brain, a problem of assimilation, chronic inflammation, and failing mitochondria. And above all, a consequence of a modern diet that is ill-suited to our biology. Her book should be read by all medical schools, in all psychiatric offices, and by every doctor, in my opinion. And it should be on the nightstand of those who want to think more clearly, live stronger, and find inner peace through the most fundamental means, what we put on our plates. Dr. Georgia Ede, hi, and thank you so much for agreeing to this interview.
It is really an honor to be here, and I am so excited to see the book coming out in French with a beautiful new cover and a French title, and to be able to connect with French-speaking audiences in Canada, France, and around the world.
Yes, this is so great. There's so much good work that is being done in the English language, and not all of it is getting translated into French. And for people who are unilingual, francophone French speaker, they do not have access to this wonderful information that could be so life-changing and so life-transforming. So this is so great that Éditions Souccar had the idea and the project to translate your book, because this book changes lives. For sure. So, Georgia, you are a Harvard-trained, board-certified psychiatrist specializing in nutritional and metabolic psychiatry. Your passion is to empower people with psychiatric conditions to reduce or eliminate the need for medication by changing how they eat. But which changes are worth making, and why? Answering those questions is exactly what we're going to discuss today. So, Georgia, your book starts with a provocative question. What if what you eat harms your brain? What do you say, Georgia, to those who think that diet has nothing to do with mood?
That's what I thought for a very long time. When I was in medical school and in psychiatric training, that's exactly what I thought. I didn't think that food had anything to do with the brain. I wasn't taught anything about it. So for 10 years, I practiced without understanding how very critically important food is to the brain. Now, of course, I was taught that brain problems, mental health problems like depression, anxiety, psychosis, Alzheimer's disease. I was taught that all of these problems that I was going to be treating as a psychiatrist were chemical imbalances in the brain.
Mm-hmm.
And the best way to correct those was with medication. But of course, where do those chemicals come from in the first place? They come from the foods we eat. And so there are so many different reasons to learn how to feed your brain a brain-healthy diet, which is actually a very different way of eating than the way we are taught to eat. So that's why I wrote the book, is because I want people to know how much more control they have over their mental health than they realize.
So true, eh? We are taught as doctors that, you know, this is what mental diseases are, and this is how you treat them. But people are not taught they can do anything whatsoever about their diseases. Sure, you can sleep, you can exercise, but you know, this is it. There's not much you can do about it. But your book says, oh no, there's a lot you can do about it, for sure. You tell the story of Melissa in your book, who overcomes severe bipolar disorder thanks to a strict ketogenic diet after 20 years of ineffective treatments. Can you tell Can you tell us her story, please?
So here we need to edit because I don't know who Melissa is. So must have been using a different name.
Oh, that must be the French version that didn't translate so well. Okay. Who's that patient of yours that had 20 years of severe bipolar disorder?
So I'm going to look for the person that you're looking for.
I'm so sorry about that.
No.
I have read your book, and I have lent your book to my big brother who has a severe mental condition, and I'm just hoping for the day that he opens the cover, but he hasn't yet.
Yeah, so I have to figure out which story this is. It doesn't sound familiar to me at all. So that's
okay. So you have a good story you can tell us from a patient from your book, then?
Yes, of course. I'm just so curious who that Melissa person might be. So I think one of the best stories to talk about might be, we could talk about Fran. At least I say I don't know what name is being used in the French book because I haven't seen it. So if I say her name is Fran, I don't know if that's the name they used in the book.
But just tell us a story of a patient that you. Okay, let me rephrase that. So in your book, you discuss some cases of patients who overcome severe disorders thanks to ketogenic diet or changing their diet or following your advice with their diet. Can you tell us the story of one of your patients, please?
Yeah, so there are stories in the book about people with bipolar disorder, about people with severe eating disorders, especially binge eating disorder and food addiction, people with anxiety disorders, people with ADHD, with depression, and even the story that I think would be helpful to share right now with your viewers is a story of Fran. And so Fran, and I don't know if that was the same name that was used in the French book, but Fran is her real name, and she's comfortable with me sharing her story, which is why I would like to share it with you. So Fran had a head injury, just a mild head injury. She'd fallen on the ice about 20 years before she met me, and she had a little bit of what's called mild cognitive impairment. And she had also a mild seizure disorder, mild epilepsy as a result of this injury. And so for about 15 or 20 years, she was very stable. She took a very small dose of a medicine for seizures, and she she had a little bit of cognitive impairment, but she was able to manage. And then as she entered her 60s, her cognition, her memory, and her thinking started to decline. And she went to her doctor, her primary care doctor, and her doctor said, oh, well, we knew this was going to happen because you have this history of this head injury with mild cognitive impairment, which often will then become Alzheimer's disease. So this is what's happening. You are now developing Alzheimer's disease. And so the reason why she was so scared, the reason why she went to her doctor was because a couple of things she'd noticed, which were very different for her. So one is that she sat down at her sewing machine, and she used her sewing machine almost every day for 50 years and could not remember how to use the machine. And then on a different day, she was sitting in the living room talking to her son and stopped in the middle of a sentence and couldn't remember what the rest of the sentence was going to be. And that happened multiple times. It was really frightening for her. So the doctor said, this is what's happening. You're developing Alzheimer's dementia, and your cognitive test scores are lower than they were before. So I'm going to send you to a neurologist, a specialist, to do more sophisticated testing, but he doesn't have an appointment for 10 weeks. So just go home and don't worry about it. And in 10 weeks, you can see the neurologist. And so meanwhile, she's thinking, I have Alzheimer's. This is really terrifying.
Yes.
And really, really scary. And so she talked with her son, and her son was actually seeing me he was using a ketogenic diet to treat a different mental health concern. And so he asked me if I would see her. So I met with her, and she was 100% willing to try a ketogenic diet. She was very excited about it. She'd seen how it had been helpful to her son with his own concerns. And so she started a ketogenic diet and she followed it very strictly. I asked her to get her ketones into a particular range and be very strict. And she had the support of her son. And by the time she saw the neurologist, her memory testing was normal. And the neurologist said, you can take that Alzheimer's diagnosis off of your chart. This ketogenic diet is really helping you. So she was able to sew again. She was able to remember conversations again. And this is now several years ago, and I still speak with her multiple times per year. She's doing still very, very well. In fact, her family used to worry about leaving her with the grandchildren because she'd become so forgetful. And now they have absolutely, this is years later, she watches the grandchildren all the time. They completely trust her, and she's able to, have that nice relationship with them. So things didn't just get better from that point. They were better than they had ever been in a really long time. And that's the power of the ketogenic diet, is it can really bring brain cells. If they've been sluggish, it can kind of wake them up and bring them back to life.
This is fantastic. And this needs to be known for sure. Does that mean it works for everybody and we can cure Alzheimer's? No, it doesn't, right?
No. So Alzheimer's disease, as you and I both know very well, and many people understand, is that it is a neurodegenerative disease. So it's a disease that develops over decades. It's not as though you wake up one morning and you suddenly have Alzheimer's disease. Right. It's a gradual decline in brain energy production. It becomes harder and harder over the years, especially if you're eating the wrong way. It becomes harder for your brain to turn glucose into energy, blood sugar into energy, and the brain gradually loses steam. And so then by the time you have a diagnosis of Alzheimer's, you can already have lost 25% of your brain's glucose processing power. And you can also have lost brain cells. The hippocampus, which is the learning and memory center of the brain, can already have shrunk by 10% by the time you notice even mild memory problems. So this is a very long, slow disease. And by the time you have the diagnosis, there will be, in many cases, some function and some cells that you can't get back. But it's also never too late to try. It's never too late to improve your metabolic health, your physical health, your mental health. And many people, I've worked with quite a few people in my practice with early Alzheimer's disease and mild cognitive impairment who have seen really tremendous benefits after just a few weeks of starting a ketogenic diet. So really never too late to try to improve the health of your brain.
Absolutely. And it's just food. So it's not like it's irreversible surgery, or it's a type of chemotherapy that could be dangerous with dangerous side effects that are irreversible. It's just food. You can stop. If you don't like it, it doesn't work for you, you just stop. Right?
Exactly. And because you practice this way, you're one of the thought leaders in this field, and you share this information with the French-speaking public, you know that this is a very simple, common sense intervention. It's just improving the quality of your diet, and especially getting those blood glucose and insulin levels into a healthy range, which it's never too early to start doing that, but it's never too late either. So all of us need to understand how important it is for multiple aspects of health. All your cells need you. All of your organs and all of your cells need you to have those glucose and insulin levels in the right range in order for them to function properly.
Absolutely. Like, you're a psychiatrist, you take care of the mind mainly, but as you've said, I've heard you say in conferences that, as far as we know, as studies confirm, that the mind, that the head is attached to the body, right? So those two are connected and interconnected together. So obviously, if the body is sick, if the body has too much glucose all the time on a chronic basis, insulin resistance and all that, if the body is sick, the mind, the brain will get sick too. Those are not separated things, right? So the brain will get sick too. So I take care a bit more of the body, the metabolic disease, but you're right, it's never too early. And what we see now is quite scary, isn't it? With young kids, teenagers, young adults in their early 20s, 30s, developing type 2 diabetes, heart diseases, and all kinds of problems that are rooted, that have as a root cause insulin resistance and too much glucose, right? But we cannot separate that from what happens to the brain. And it's one of the reasons why nowadays we tend to call Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes, right? Because those are connected. They have a common root cause.
Exactly. And really, type 3 diabetes just means that, the glucose and insulin levels are damaging your brain.
Yes.
Type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease that affects the ability of your to make insulin. Type
Yes.
2 diabetes is when you've got too much insulin and
in your body, yes,
lose control over
yes.
your glucose levels. Type 3 is, they call Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes because the brain is having trouble using glucose for energy. But, the reason why I went through the 1, 2, and 3 is because I think you could really list multiple types of diabetes.
Yes.
We could maybe call fatty liver type 4 diabetes. We could maybe call heart disease type 5 diabetes, and so on. Obesity type 6. There are so many different ways in which high glucose and insulin levels damage every organ in the body. And so if you can just get control, and we know exactly how to do it, it's not rocket science. If you just get control on your glucose and insulin levels, you can have tremendous control over the future of every aspect of your health.
Absolutely. So, Georgia, tell me in more detail, how can ultra-processed foods worsen anxiety or depression? There doesn't seem to be a connection for those who don't know that food has an impact on your mental stability, your mental health, and your mental well-being.
Yeah, so take anxiety, for example, which is a very, very common mental health condition. Some people just suffer with mild anxiety, some worry or some obsessional thinking sometimes, and other people are really paralyzed by severe anxiety, obsessive worry, and panic attacks, and so forth. And so it's a very common condition. And a lot of people think of it as being driven by stress hormones, emotions, and there is some truth to that. But what a lot of people don't know is that the foods you eat, the food choices you make, send signals to the hormones in your body, including your stress hormones. You can actually, many of the foods we eat, including some foods we think of as healthy, actually spike your stress hormones from within. So you can be peaceful on a tropical island, reading a book, sitting in the sun. But if you're sitting there and you're drinking, say, a Coca-Cola, or you've just eaten a muffin, or a big bowl of oatmeal, and you're going to get a glucose spike in the blood that's going to be exaggerated, then you're going to get an insulin spike right behind that to bring the glucose back down. And you might think, okay, well, as long as the glucose comes back down, why should I worry about that? That's what insulin is for. Well, the problem is that insulin talks to lots of other hormones throughout the body, including the stress hormones. So when you see this spike in glucose and insulin, even though it comes back down to normal, there's a delayed reaction. It's like a roller coaster that affects lots of, like a ripples in a pond. It affects lots of other hormones, including your stress hormones. So there's this great study I put in the book where they took healthy teenage boys and they compared them either drinking a sugar sweetened cola or a cola sweetened without sugar. And what they saw was that their adrenaline levels, which is one of your stress hormones, a very powerful one, spiked to 4 to 5 times its baseline, its original level, in about 4 to 5 hours later, after the kids drank the soda, but not in the kids who didn't drink the sugar sweetened soda, only in the kids who drank the sugar sweetened soda. That's a powerful hormonal signal. And so one of the most predictable benefits of eating a low carbohydrate diet and getting off that hormonal roller coaster is calm, like an inner calm. People feel just more solid, more resilient. They can manage stress better. It's not that it takes the stress away, but it stabilizes you from within. So you're not on that internal hormonal roller coaster. And so reduced anxiety and peace of mind, those are the kinds of things we see so frequently, sometimes even within just a few days of starting a low carbohydrate diet.
Yes, absolutely. It's like it gives you more resilience to deal with those stressors that are not going away just because you eat less sugar or less processed food, but you're better equipped to deal with it, you know, with all your functions and all your capacities. You have a better chance at dealing with it properly.
Exactly.
Yeah. So can we cure, in quotation mark, can we cure mental disorder through diet alone?
So it depends on what you mean by the word cure. So we could have the same conversation about diabetes or obesity, or So why don't we say that we can reverse the symptoms and we can put it into remission?
Yes, those are much better terms.
I like those terms better because I know for myself. So I've been eating a ketogenic diet for most of, since 2012. For almost that entire time. I've taken a few breaks over the years, but for the most part, that's what I've done. And, I think it's really important that people understand that the way a kid, Èvelyne, I forgot the question.
Where was talking about putting into remission as opposed to curing?
Oh, thank you. Okay, so let me back up.
Sure.
So we could have the same conversation if we were talking. We could have the same conversation about type 2 diabetes. If you get your blood sugar levels into a healthy range and they stay there, and you no longer need insulin or other medications, is that a cure? Well, the problem is that if you start eating the wrong way again, all those problems will come back. So I say we put it to sleep. We manage it. It goes into remission, and it will stay in remission for as long as you follow your healthy plan. The plan works if you follow it. And that's what people need to know. Whether the word cure, I think, is a little bit slippery, because I think if a problem were completely cured, then you wouldn't need to worry about it so much anymore. But these are problems, mental health problems included, that can come back very quickly if you start eating the wrong way again. And this happens in my patients all the time, where they will get a lot of benefits from a ketogenic diet, feel so much better. And then, because we're human beings, we like to do this. Oh, I feel so much better. I can just start relaxing now, and I can kind of, the carbs creep back in, and I don't have to be so careful. Honestly, for many people, within 24 hours, their depression or their anxiety or their psychotic symptoms or whatever it was that they were dealing with will come roaring back. So it is, for most people, at least for most adults, it is putting the condition to sleep and getting you robustly healthy. But that doesn't mean that you can let your guard down.
Yes, exactly. What made you sick once will make you sick again. If what you used to do brought you to being type 2 diabetic, or have, I don't know, anxiety, severe anxiety or depression, it will do it again. It will do it over and over again. But I guess, Georgia, sometimes people have to experiment it themselves, to truly remember, oh yeah, this is my treatment. This is my lifelong treatment to remain in remission and live the best life that I can live. This is my treatment. Food is my treatment.
That's right. I mean, we learn by trial and error and experience. And so when people take a break from the diet to see what happens, then you learn how important it is for you, and what you can actually get away with and what you need to be careful with. And that's normal and fine. But most of my patients do experiment with their diet along the way, but most of them also do find that they don't have the flexibility that they wish they had with their diet. that most cannot go back to eating just whatever they wanted to eat, unfortunately.
Yes. Yes. Do you find, Georgia, that you need the people, the patients that are the most successful are the patients who have changed their mindset about their diet, who are not like, oh, I cannot eat this, I cannot eat that. They change to, I don't want, I choose not. I choose this because I choose to be healthy and to feel healthy. Do you find that?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, and you know, the when people do these experiments, they learn how important it is to their mental and physical health, and that's really powerful motivation. And so, you know, and then they can you know, compare and compare. Okay, what would I rather have? Would I rather have that cookie, or would I rather have depression? You know, or be free of depression, right? And so you can make that choice for yourself, and so it's empowering. And the other thing I think, which is really helpful to think about, is that when people are thinking about, you know, weighing those choices in their minds, one of the motivators can be that instead of thinking about, well, I can't have this and I can't have that, you know, that my food freedom is so restricted. Okay, well, behind every no is a yes. So when you say no to this, what are you saying yes to? Just remind yourself all the things you're saying yes to that will disappear. You will lose if you go down this other path. And so, and a third piece I think is really useful. A lot of people, the way most people eat, most of the foods that people are eating, if they're not eating a special diet of some kind, are not actually food. It's not actually good for the human body. It doesn't actually nourish or protect or energize your cells. It's really just addictive, ultra-processed, you know, extremely tasty. But these are not foods. These are substances. And to kind of redefine, when people redefine for themselves what food is, then they no longer think, well, I can't have that food. They say, well, you know what? I've learned, I understand what real food is, and that's going to be my way forward. It's not that I'm not eating these foods anymore. I'm giving up these substances that aren't good for me.
Fantastic. Yeah, this is the way you need to change your mindset if you want to stick with this for the long term. Otherwise, you feel deprived and this is unfair. If you feel positive about everything you've gained, and this is a better way to look at it and to live it, for sure. I see that with metabolic disease too. The only problem I see, Georgia, is when people have food addiction. It gets tricky, to like, they understand everything they can gain from having like a low carb or ketogenic diet. They understand with their brain, but they have this addiction that is quite much stronger than we actually, we don't even consider food addiction to be a real entity, a real metabolic, a real mental health problem, but it is. And it is an issue, isn't it, with patients who are dealing with mental disorder or metabolic disorder. They know food is their cure, but they also know that it's, they have to give up their friends, like the food that have accompanied them through and through, like all life events and all that. And for some of them, the addiction is quite strong, isn't it?
Yes. And, you clearly, because you have so much experience with this, that it's real. It is real. It is
absolutely
powerful. It is really a beast. And it really is the biggest challenge in my work is not convincing people about how logical it is to eat this way,
yes.
all the benefits of eating this way. The biggest challenge is that behavior change and maintaining that behavior change, and really using an addiction model to support people who struggle with food addiction. And there are quite a few people who do. And
yes.
Food addiction is there's a wonderful, by the way, conference, if people don't know about this. There's the second annual International Food Addiction Conference. It's going to be held in London in September. So I'll be speaking there, and there'll be other wonderful people there. It's run by Dr. Jen Unwin, who's a food addiction expert, a psychologist who specializes in food addiction. And the reason why this conference was started was because we need to help people understand this is a real condition, and it really is destroying people's health and their lives. People are literally eating themselves to death because they can't stop eating these foods, which are designed, engineered by chemical engineers in food manufacturing corporations to be irresistible and unsatisfying. So it's not your fault. It's not your fault if you find it difficult to stop eating those foods. The foods are designed to addict you. So it's really powerful. And the only way forward is really abstinence, understanding which foods are the ones that are not safe for you, where if you have even a small amount, it may be weeks or months until you return to your healthy plan, because they are very powerful. That addiction is a very powerful force. So one of the beautiful things about a ketogenic diet is that it really controls appetite hormones and reduces cravings. It makes it so much easier to resist those foods than if you're eating the normal way. You need so much less willpower. And so it's very important to give this a try if you have food addiction, because if you've never tried it before, and you might think, well, how in the world could I ever live without XYZ, the cake, the cookies, the chips, whatever, ice cream, whatever it is you're addicted to. If you haven't tried being in ketosis for at least 6 weeks to get those appetite hormones under control, you don't know how much easier it could be. And you really you owe it to yourself to give that a try.
Yes, the quietness in the brain, the diminished voices of negotiation that are so overpowering sometimes. Like you have, and I have a lot of patients who have told me, just like, for sure you have the same situation, where they're like, the whole day it just talks all the time. Oh, you deserve this, go eat this. Oh, wouldn't that be so nice if we could eat this or eat that? And it just takes over and uses up so much brain space, so much brain energy, and it's a constant fight. And so patients in ketosis, and when I'm in ketosis too, it's really quiet. Sure, there is that voice that's like, oh, wouldn't that be nice if we ate this or that today? But it's like the voice is far behind, and it's not really loud, and it's easy to ignore. It's easy to not pay attention to it. And it's also much easier, like you said, if you're not hungry all the time, if your hunger hormones are under control and stable, which means, by the way, that of course your blood sugar is stable and your insulin levels are stable. And when that magic happens, that your insulin and glucose levels are stable and they stop the roller coasters, then you don't have so much hunger all the time. You don't have this voice all the time. So it's much easier, it's much nicer, and you can dedicate your mental energy and your time to other things, your passions, stuff you love, learning another language or practicing a sport. There is room, there is space in your life and in your brain for more than just being focused all the time on the food that is controlling you.
I love everything you just said. You said it so beautifully. And again, clearly, you know the ins and outs of this because of your long years of metabolic practice. It's a very serious condition, but there's tremendous hope. Tremendous
Absolutely.
hope.
Yes.
And so, this is why we're here, right? This is why we're talking, is because people need to know that there is tremendous hope. And it's not, changing your diet is difficult at first, but it gets easier with practice, just like anything. And when you experience how much, like you said, there's peace of mind on the other side, then that becomes something that you want to continue to experience. And so it's a really wonderful, different state of mind.
Absolutely. So tell us what is harmful in our modern food, in the standard American diet or the Western sort of modern foods and diet that we have. What is harmful in there for the brain? Is this just the sugar, just the glucose molecules?
Not just sugar, right? So of course, but really anything that turns instantly into sugar in the bloodstream. So that includes things that aren't sweet. That includes starches like flours and cereals, like oats and rice and corn and wheat, and starchy vegetables like potatoes. And so it doesn't have to be sweet to be sugar. As my friend and colleague, Dr. David Unwin, likes to say, starch is just sugar molecules holding hands. And so
nicely said.
And so it's all the same. But then the carbohydrate is one aspect that people need to understand, especially the refined carbohydrates. Those are the naked processed carbohydrates. Those turn rapidly into glucose in the bloodstream and give you a really exaggerated spike of glucose and insulin and other hormones after you eat them. But then there are other foods to be aware of. And so even the slow starches and the whole grains, for example, and fruits, things that we think of as healthy, those can do the very same thing. And this is where a continuous glucose monitor can be very useful in helping people understand how the truth about how different foods that they enjoy actually affects their metabolism, because we're all a little bit different. And so, for people who this happens a lot, somebody will drag someone, like their husband or their sister or their mother in, for an appointment with me and say, I follow a ketogenic diet and it's helped me a lot. I want my husband or sister or mother to do it too. And of course, that person has no interest in doing it. And so, for example, there was someone who brought their parents for an appointment, and their parents were very uninterested in changing their diet. And they really enjoyed having a big bowl of oatmeal in the morning because they were told that oatmeal was good for them and that was good for their brain. And so they said, well, we really don't want to follow a ketogenic diet. Do you really think we have to do that? And I said, I don't really know. Why don't we find out? And so the continuous glucose monitor helps people understand how their personal metabolism reacts to the foods they like. And I have yet to have a patient who has agreed to wear a continuous glucose monitor not change their diet, because information is so interesting and motivating, and it's fun. It's fun to see what's happening on the inside. There are a few other foods to be aware of. There's a longer list in the book, but some of the more common foods to be aware of, things like beans, but also alcohol. And so when you're thinking about what a healthy diet is supposed to look like, you really want to focus it on animal foods like meat, seafood, poultry, and eggs, which we're told are not good for us, but nothing could be further from the truth. We are, and then the non-starchy vegetables and the very low sugar fruits and the healthy fats from whole foods. And if you design your diet like that, you're going to be healthier than 95% of people around you, whether you're in ketosis or not. And so I think that there's a lot of power in understanding what a healthy diet is actually supposed to look like, because we've been given so much of the wrong information about what we're supposed to eat. It's not based in biology. And so if you follow the biological wisdom of your body and of our evolutionary past, your body will thank you for that.
Absolutely. Can you tell us some early signs of brain distress, signs that one can identify in their regular daily life?
Yes. So problems with sleep is number one. So if you're having trouble sleeping, or if you're waking up in the middle of the night feeling anxious, or if you're having trouble falling asleep, staying asleep, or if you're waking up really early in the morning, like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, that is a sign that something isn't right. And that's often for people who already have a mental health condition like anxiety or depression or bipolar disorder or psychosis. It's often one of the first clues that a bad episode is coming, is the sleep becomes disrupted. Another thing is that people can feel more anxious and more irritable, and more fatigued, more easily kind of worn down, and their tolerance and capacity to handle things becomes less. So where normally you might kind of breeze through the day and you get things done and things don't bother you too much, one of the signs of declining mental health is where you will start your capacity starts to shrink and you start to feel like, I just can't handle this. This day was just too difficult. And even though nothing particularly unusual happened that day, compared to the past, your ability to manage your emotions and have enough energy to get through the day and to not overreact to things, or to imagine the worst, just becomes a lot more difficult, a lot smaller. So, because really what we're talking about is what is good mental health. And so when you're looking for signs of poor mental health, they have to do with things like, how am I managing the stress in my day? How am I sleeping? How is my appetite? How am I interacting with other people? How much work am I able to get done? How am I envisioning my future? What is my attitude towards life? Like all of these, and staying organized, like all of these things are signs of good mental health. So if any one of those starts to become kind of rough around the edges, then you know that something isn't quite right. And so that's understanding the difference between good mental health and poor mental health is really important, because most of us now think we've come to expect suboptimal mental health. We've come to think of it as normal to have trouble getting through the day or not bouncing back from a stressful event, or, you know what I mean? And so, being easily irritated or anxious, or to shut down, or to not want to see anybody, that sort of thing. We just kind of, or by 5 o'clock having absolutely no energy left, and you just have to, there's nothing you can do as soon as you finish your workday. None of those things is normal. And those are all signs that the brain is under stress and needs help.
For sure. Chronic stress. It's you're talking about, it seems to me you're talking about chronic cortisol too, when there's this hormone of chronic stress, of hypervigilance, that is, it's not meant to be in our body all the time. It's meant to be secreted, cortisol, when there's a danger in the environment, until the point where you've removed yourself from the danger and you've secured yourself, the environment, your family, your body, and all that. And then the body just lets it go and stops producing that hormone. But that is not how we live anymore. We live in a state, a lot of us, in a state of chronic secretion of cortisol. And everything you just described, that is a chronic state of over production of cortisol.
That's right. Exactly. And, cortisol is there for a reason. It's supposed to help you in situations of chronic stress. But many of us are in situations we feel as though we're under stress all the time.
Yes.
Now, one of the problems with cortisol is that it tells your liver to make more glucose and release it into the bloodstream, because it thinks you need fast energy. It thinks you need an extra boost of energy to deal with whatever the crisis is. There's a saber-toothed tiger at the door of your cave, or whatever it is. You're being chased by a wild animal. That's what it was one of the reasons why it was originally, what it was used for. But
physical stress.
A real environmental stress that requires a real biological change inside your body so you can handle it. But the way we're eating now, we are eating in a way that raises our cortisol levels. And even if there isn't a stress outside of you, there's stress coming from within. And that's going to keep your glucose levels a little bit higher all the time. It's going to make it harder for you to get into ketosis. And high cortisol levels do damage the brain. So if you've got if your cortisol is running too high too often, it can actually damage cells of the brain, including cells of the hippocampus, your brain's learning and memory center, and it can shrink. So stress management is not, stress management is nothing, it's not a minor issue. learning how to reduce stress and manage stress in your life is really important for your metabolic health.
And it's harder than it seems, eh? It's harder to say, okay, I'm going to reduce my stress level and I'm going to tell my body, it's okay. There's no, predator in the environment. You can relax. Sometimes the body, the brain, they don't get the memo, they don't necessarily do it just because you want to, right? Managing stress is very hard. At least if we manage the inner stress through food, that's something we have control over. And that is much easier than just trying to make your body believe that it doesn't have to secrete all this cortisol all the time.
That's right. And if you're well adapted to a ketogenic diet, which means that your body becomes very good at burning fat for energy, your body will need to draw less upon cortisol and glucose because it will be more easily able to burn fat. And so people who are in really good ketosis, they often can handle stress a lot better and don't experience stress in the same way. So there's a really powerful connection between how we eat and how we feel and how our hormones are behaving.
Super interesting. So is it necessary to be in ketosis in order to improve mental health?
Not for everybody. So all of us are a little bit different. We have different situations. We have different degrees of metabolic health. We're different ages. We take different medications. We have different activity levels. So there are lots of differences between us. So some people will benefit. The reason why I put 3 different diet plans in the book is because some people, all they need to do is just clean up their diet and just understand which whole foods are the ones to focus on, eat a whole foods diet, keep their glucose levels in a little bit lower by eating less carbohydrate, but not down to a ketogenic range, just cleaning up the diet, improving the nutritional quality of the diet, improving the metabolic quality of the diet, getting some exercise, some sunshine, stress management, and that's sometimes all anybody needs. But there are a growing number of us who do need to follow a ketogenic diet in order to really achieve the benefits that we're looking for. And so that's why that's one of the diets in the book is a ketogenic diet, is because if you try this, what I call in the book a quiet paleo diet, I'm not sure what it's being called in French, but this quiet paleo diet, if that doesn't bring you the benefits that you're hoping for, you can then move to the next step, which is a ketogenic version of that same diet. And so I think it's about personalizing the protocol to your preferences, but also to your metabolic needs and to your goals. So it's very important that we don't send the message that everybody needs to eat a ketogenic diet, or they're not. And so even though I believe a ketogenic diet is very safe and healthy, and that just about anybody, there are a few exceptions that I've put in the book, just about anybody would benefit from a ketogenic diet, does not mean everybody has to eat a ketogenic diet to be well.
How about plant foods or plant-based diets? Are they okay for the brain? Are they good for the brain? Or are there certain concerns that we have when it comes to plant-based diets or plant foods?
Yeah, so there's a chapter in the book, in English, it's called The Plant-Based Brain. And it helps people understand what the real risks and benefits of a plant-based diet are. So when I'm using the term plant-based, I'm thinking about vegan and vegetarian diets. And so in any case, we are told all the time that vegan and vegetarian diets are healthier for us. And there is science. There are clinical experiments, human clinical trials that show that if you design the vegan or vegetarian diet in a particular way, then it will be healthier for people in these studies. But what people don't know is that they don't know what those diets were compared to.
Yes.
So those diets, the vegan and vegetarian diets that outperform the comparison diet is always a much less healthy diet, higher in refined carbohydrates and all kinds of processed foods. And there are often many other things they change as well. So what we don't have, I've never seen, is a study where you take a whole foods plant-based diet, a very high quality, and you compare it to a very high quality whole foods animal-based diet. They're otherwise very similar, but they're both high quality whole foods diets without all the junk and the refined carbohydrates and the vegetable oils and the processed foods. And that experiment hasn't been done. So it's really important for people to know that yes, those diets are healthier than the so-called standard Western diet or standard American diet, standard Canadian diet. Those diets are healthier, but pretty much any diet's going to be healthier than those diets. So it's not saying much. And the other thing is that, I worked with college students for years, and many really preferred a plant-based diet. But they didn't understand that to be healthier on a plant-based diet, you have to follow the whole foods part. It's a whole foods plant-based diet that has been shown to be healthier, not just any old plant-based diet. And most of my students, of course, were eating a very highly processed, unhealthy plant-based diet with lots of processed foods and sugars, and that were really causing a lot of health problems.
Yes, that reminds me, Georgia, of the glycemic index. A lot of my patients are like, yeah, but doctor, I eat low glycemic index food, so I should be okay. And I'm like, yet you have type 2 diabetes. So, we need to maybe unpack this a little bit to understand that, low glycemic index only means that there's maybe I say to them, maybe there's less molecules of glucose in the food that you're picking, but it doesn't mean that it's high quality food. It doesn't mean that it's real food. It could be ultra processed food, and it's also the quantities that you're eating at the end of the day, right? If you want to have a low carb diet or a ketogenic diet, you need to count or to have a good idea and to remain on the low side of the number of grams of carbohydrates you eat in a day. So it's not just about what your blood sugar does or doesn't do, which is what the glycemic index aims at controlling, but it's the quantity, the quality of what you eat. Do you find that patients are stuck on the glycemic index and they bring it back and they don't understand the difference between low carb, ketogenic, and low glycemic index?
It's interesting you're asking that, because 20 years ago I would have said yes, but at least now, at least in the United States, most of my patients do not mention that term. It was very popular back when the South Beach diet, something called the South Beach diet, book came out, which was very much focused on low glycemic index. But I haven't had a conversation about glycemic index with a patient for quite a long time. I think it's maybe, at least in the area where I am, maybe not as popular. But I have heard people use the term slow carbs or whole food carbohydrates, or carbohydrates from fruits and vegetables or whole grains. Aren't those supposed to be good for me? Those aren't processed. Those aren't processed carbs. Those are whole food carbs. So those are good for me. Things like fruit and steel cut oatmeal and whole grain bread, those kinds of things. And so, as you were saying, the body can't really tell the difference between different carbohydrates. I mean, they will be processed more slowly, but that doesn't mean that they'll be processed more slowly, and all that means is that the glucose spike is going to be softer. It's not going to be as high, but it's going to last a lot longer. So you're going to have higher glucose for longer on a low glycemic index diet. So when you eat the processed carbs, you get this kind of a problem, which is very destabilizing and can even feel uncomfortable. People can get panicky. They can get hangry, hungry and angry. They can feel sweaty and shaky and all kinds of things. And when they get this steep spike and this steep crash, when you have a low glycemic or slowly processed carbohydrate food, You're not going to get that steep spike. You're going to get more of a hill like this.
Yes.
It's going to last for a long time. And so the problem with that is that one of the reasons why we're all so unhealthy now is we're spending too much time in with glucose and insulin levels that are running too high, and we're never letting them get down into this nice low healing place. So if we're spending all of our time, if you're processing, your body is processing carbohydrate all day long, even between meals, because you've eaten a nice slow release form of carbohydrate, then you're not going to get the nice benefits of giving your body a break from food processing. Your cells don't want to be processing food all day long. They need to spend some time cleaning up and recycling and doing maintenance work and just resting, or else they'll never heal. And so if you're eating slow carbohydrates, your glucose and insulin levels are staying high between meals. They're also staying high all night long. And so you just never get that. And the brain needs to spend regular periods of time in that low insulin, low glucose state for it to be able to repair itself and heal from the damage, from all the stress and damage of the day.
And this is what we have always done as a species, right? We used to be like that all the time, alternate between fed state and fasting state. And alternating is what is normal. The way we eat now, the way we're overfed and fed all the time, and we eat multiple meals a day, and we eat late in the evening and all that, and we don't get that digestive rest that you mentioned. This is not normal. This is relatively new in human evolution, and our bodies are not equipped to deal with this lifestyle, right? So, Georgia, what about caffeine, chocolate, and wine?
Are you trying to make me really unpopular? Oh, nobody's going to want to hear this. So caffeine and chocolate and red wine. So, sometimes we are told to think of these things as superfoods that have special benefits for the brain because they have these, antioxidants in them. So for example, and antioxidants fight oxidative stress. So oxidative stress is very damaging if we've got too much of it. Oxidative stress is a very damaging process that can damage cells, including brain cells, and as can inflammation. So we're told all the time that if we want to protect ourselves against damaging oxidative stress, that we're supposed to eat and drink things that are full of these powerful antioxidants. So red wine contains an antioxidant called resveratrol. Chocolate contains antioxidants called flavanols. Those are a couple of examples. And so these molecules that are in these foods, if you put them in a test tube, they look like they can fight oxidative stress, but that's not how they work in the human body. They actually don't work in the human body. It's very, very hard for us to absorb them, first of all. And the other thing to know about them is that let's say, for example, you're eating a bar of chocolate. So nobody I know eats completely unsweetened dark chocolate like Baker's chocolate. Nobody I know does that because it's extremely bitter. But the chocolate almost always contains at least some amount of sugar. And sugar is a really powerful promoter of inflammation and oxidative stress. These are the very same things you're trying to fight with that little bit of flavanol antioxidant that may or may not be present in much amount in the chocolate bar. Most chocolate bars don't have very much of this special flavanol in them, and they're very much overpowered by the sugar. And so what you're getting is the opposite of what you're trying to get. You're getting a powerful promoter of oxidation and just little tiny hints of ineffective antioxidant molecules. And the very same thing with red wine. So with red wine, we are often told, like the Mediterranean diet is supposed to have some red wine in it. And the red wine is supposed to be really, really good for your brain because of this antioxidant molecule called resveratrol. But the problem is, well, the studies didn't use red wine. The studies of brain health didn't use red wine. Lots of reasons why they didn't, but one of the reasons why they didn't use red wine was that the amount of red wine you would need to give the volunteers and the study to achieve even the lowest dose of resveratrol in those studies would be 500 bottles of Pinot Noir per day. That's how much you would need to drink to get enough resveratrol to maybe fight a little bit of oxidative stress in your brain. 500 bottles of alcohol. Alcohol is a powerful promoter of oxidative stress. So that lonely little milligram of resveratrol is swimming in a sea of alcohol. And so you've just done the opposite of what you're trying to do. These are just myths that make food and beverage manufacturers money. They really want you to be confused about this because that sells more chocolate. It sells more red wine. And who doesn't want to be told that all they need to do to improve their brain health is eat more chocolate and drink more red wine? Sign me up.
Seriously? If it were that simple, right?
Right.
What about coffee, though?
Oh, yes. Sorry, you asked about coffee too. So coffee is interesting because there are some pros and cons to coffee. And so it's a little more complicated and it depends really on who you are. So the caffeine in coffee, it is a drug. It's the most widely used drug in the world. And so it does disrupt normal brain chemistry and body chemistry, just like all drugs do. So the question is it giving you more risks or more benefits, depending on what you're using it for? So first of all, if you're drinking coffee and you're putting lots of sugar in it, that is absolutely much more risk than benefit. Even if you're putting certain types of milk in it, especially plant milks that may be high in sugar or vegetable oil, a lot of the oat milks and soy milks and so forth, rice milks will be very high in sugar. And so that's also not a good idea. And some of them have quite a bit of vegetable oil in them as well to thicken them. That's also not a good idea. Vegetable oil is not good for the brain. But what if you're having, let's say, black coffee with a little pinch of some milk or some cream or some coconut oil, or maybe you're having coffee with a small amount of a sweetener that's relatively safe. The pros and cons of that are really personalized, because some of my patients are quite sensitive to caffeine and don't even realize it. It's disrupting their sleep. It's giving them anxiety. It is making them more irritable, and it is suppressing their appetite while it's in their system. But then as it wears off, they can become very hungry, get rebound hunger. So I always encourage people, it's not the first thing I recommend, but I always encourage people, and I say this in the book too, if you've tried one of these if you've really kind of worked very hard on your diet and really made lots of improvements to your diet and you're still not feeling right, it really is worth it to explore a period of time without caffeine to see how it personally has affected you. And if you find that you feel a lot better without it, then you have a hard decision to make about, how much you miss it and what the pros and cons are for you. But I think it's important for people to know that caffeine does disrupt normal brain chemistry and normal body chemistry. It even, the caffeine does turn on stress hormones in the body, glucose levels can run a little higher when you've got coffee. And I've had actually a few patients, not many, so this is not a common issue, but I've had a few patients who couldn't get into ketosis because they were drinking coffee. And when they took the coffee out, they were able to easily get into ketosis. So there are a lot of things to think about there, but basically I want to encourage people to keep an open mind and be curious and explore their personal relationship with coffee.
Absolutely. And what about fasting? Fasting is one way to get into ketosis temporarily, of course. We cannot remain in fasted state forever. But is fasting risky or a bit dangerous, or is it useful for people with anxiety or depression?
It can be a very useful tool if used correctly. it can be a really powerful tool. So nothing lowers insulin faster than fasting. And, and being in a low insulin state is very healing and beneficial. So a couple of maybe cautions about fasting. So I'm a big fan of fasting. I use it in my practice fairly often. Just a couple of cautions about it, though. So if you're somebody who is using fasting, but you're not already adapted to a ketogenic diet, let's say you're eating a regular diet, but you're using fasting maybe a couple of days a week to, get the benefits of that low insulin state. Be careful what you're eating in between, and be careful how, the reason why is because if you're eating a regular diet that's got a decent amount, usually hundreds of grams of carbohydrate in it, your glucose and insulin levels will be relatively high. And then if you fast, they will drop like a stone. And it can be very uncomfortable for some people. And it can even, if you're taking certain medicines, like blood glucose lowering medicines for diabetes or blood pressure medicines for high blood pressure, it can be potentially even dangerous, just like abruptly starting a ketogenic diet can be, because you're dropping glucose and insulin levels relatively quickly. And that's a shock to the brain and body. And if you're also taking certain medicines, that can be potentially dangerous, because if you're following a diet or fasting, if you're following a ketogenic diet or fasting, which is going to lower glucose and insulin levels, lower blood pressure potentially, and you're taking a medicine, which also can lower glucose and insulin levels very, very effectively, or lower blood pressure levels, then you could quickly end up in trouble where your glucose level is too low or your blood pressure is too low, and so that's risky. So just understanding how to safely use fasting, not to fast for. I actually find that fasting, the way I use it a lot, is in people who are already on a ketogenic diet and then are trying to deepen their ketosis or get some additional benefits from their ketogenic diet, or raise their ketone levels or spend less time in food processing mode to get some additional healing. When you're in ketosis, switching in and out of adapting. When you're in ketosis already, you're adapted to a ketogenic diet, intermittent fasting is a lot more comfortable and a lot easier, because your appetite, and you're already good at burning fat. When you drop those insulin levels, they're already starting from a pretty low place, and so they're not falling from a great height. And so it's much more comfortable, and it's much easier to do. So maybe too much nuance there, but I think it's important for people to know that fasting is easier if they're eating a healthier diet.
For sure. I agree with that, for sure. If one has a standard American diet or Western diets, and they want to experiment ketosis, they're like, oh, I would like to see if it gives me mental clarity, if it reduces my anxiety. Can they simply, in your opinion, just add coconut oil, MCT oil, or even just maybe take exogenous ketones, and boom, they're going to be reaping all the benefits of ketosis?
Yeah, I love that question, because there are some people who wish and hope that that was the case, because it is hard to change. It's much harder to change your diet than it is to add a supplement, right?
Yes.
Of course. And it's not that there are no benefits to the supplements, things like exogenous ketones or MCT oil or coconut. It's not that there are no benefits to it. It's just that the benefits are much smaller and they only last for a really short period of time. So, for example, the ketone supplements, most of them last maybe 90 minutes, maybe 2 hours in the body. And they're expensive. So you have to take them multiple times per day in order to get prolonged benefits. And so that's one issue. But the other issue that I think is even more important for people to know is that ketone supplements don't lower your glucose and insulin levels into the healthy range. All they're doing, you've got your high glucose insulin, you've got your high glucose and insulin levels here in your regular diet. You're adding the ketone supplement on top of that. So now you've got high glucose, high insulin, and high ketones.
Which is not a natural state for a human body.
Thank you. Not a natural state for the human body. We're only supposed to be generating ketones from within when our glucose and insulin levels are low.
Yes.
So the combination of high glucose, high insulin, high ketones is very unnatural. Now, those ketones may bring some benefits. For example, if you're somebody, or maybe you have a family member, or you're somebody who is living in a care facility where they don't have total control over their meals, for example, or someone who has some cognitive impairment and can't learn a new way of eating, or can't remember, how to this new way of eating. There's definitely a place for these supplements in some cases, and people can also use these supplements to support their ketogenic diet or help them get back into ketosis if they've had a day off. So it's not that they can't be useful. It's just that they don't have the healing power that lowering your glucose and insulin levels does. And it's lowering those glucose and insulin levels that really, that's the healing. That's the healing. That's the healing state. And so you don't want to fool yourself into thinking that you're getting all the benefits of a truly ketogenic diet simply by taking supplements. And what I tell people is, what you really want is, you want to be generating ketones from within 24/7 for free. That's and that's going to be your maximal therapeutic benefit.
Right. I have more technical questions now for people who are more advanced with those issues, or healthcare professionals maybe. So what mechanisms link cerebral insulin resistance to disorders like depression or schizophrenia?
Yeah, so something called cerebral glucose hypometabolism, which just means sluggish brain glucose processing, slow brain glucose processing, is actually far more common than we used to realize. And you see it not just in people with dementia, where it can be quite profound. You can have quite a profound reduction in brain glucose processing speed. But you also see it in people with major depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and certain other mental health conditions. So what this is that the brain is having trouble turning glucose into energy. And so it's not firing on all cylinders. It is struggling to get the energy it needs out of glucose. And if you're in that situation, which most people with insulin resistance have some degree of cerebral glucose hypometabolism, because it's insulin resistance that leads to that state in the first place. The kind of the funny thing about the way insulin works with the brain is that the higher your blood insulin levels are, the lower your brain insulin levels can become, because the brain can become resistant to insulin, and it can be harder for insulin to cross into the brain and where it's needed to help turn glucose into energy. So your brain can be swimming in a sea of glucose and still be slowly starving to death because it doesn't have enough insulin. If you're in that situation, which a growing number of us are, a growing number of us have brains that are not really working at full capacity, then really your only hope is ketones, because ketones are the only supplemental fuel source that can cross easily into the brain and be burned by brain cells in that low insulin environment. So they can bridge that energy gap, and they can bring those cells back up to speed. If they haven't already died, you can re-energize them. So now the cell doesn't need to try to get all of its energy from glucose. Now it can use a mixture of glucose and ketones, which is much easier for it to do. And so the brain, as Professor Stephen Cunnane likes to say, is a hybrid engine, and it really works best on a mixture of glucose and ketones. If you're trying to use glucose, 100% glucose all the time, especially if you're flooding your brain with too many glucose molecules, then you're going to start burning out your mitochondria. They're not going to be able to function as efficiently or make as much energy. So it's a funny thing, but the more sugar that's in your diet, the harder it becomes for your brain to turn that sugar into energy.
That is something you explained in the conference, and it was a light bulb moment for me. I remember, because I used to think if you have insulin resistance in your whole body, you have too much sugar all the time and you have too much insulin, and there's resistance. So you need more insulin, and eventually your pancreas cannot give you any more. And there is the struggle with the, the resistance and the ever increasing amount of insulin up until your maximum, of course. And then your blood sugar, they just climb and climb, and eventually you become pre-diabetic, and eventually you become diabetic. And we see this happening over the course of many years. And as family doctors or primary care doctors, we could see it happen. We could see, we don't have to diagnose type 2 diabetes anymore. We can see it many, many, many years before. But I used to think, okay, but that's the whole body, right? That's how it is. And then you taught the whole room that day that no, it's different. Insulin resistance in the body is different than insulin resistance in the brain. And you've said it like it's obvious, but I want to just emphasize the fact that in the body, you have high levels of insulin at the same time as you have high levels of glucose, of sugar in your blood, right? But passing the blood-brain barrier, and it is a different scenario. You said there's a sea of glucose molecules, so there is a ton of sugar. It's not that there's no sugar, there's tons of sugar, but there's not enough insulin, unlike in the body. So in the brain, there is not enough insulin to do the work, but there's a lot of sugar. In the body, there's too much insulin and too much sugar, and it's completely different. So that is why that the brain cells that need to function normally, they need energy to function normally. They have energy in front of them, but they cannot access it because they need insulin to do that. And insulin is back at the blood-brain barrier, and it's not able to get through as much as it would. So it's unlike the body. So they're connected, but they work differently, those two. And when I understood that from your conference, I was like, oh, that's why. Oh, wow, like game changer in my comprehension of what is going on in the brain.
Well, years ago, I had the same aha experience when I was reading papers and started to put it together for myself. I became interested in Alzheimer's, even though at the time I was working in college mental health. I became interested in it because what I discovered was that insulin resistance and the long, slow road to Alzheimer's disease can begin in your teens and 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And I had so many students saying to me, my memory just doesn't seem to be as good. I have a harder time studying. My college students would say, I just don't feel as sharp as I did in high school. I used to be able to, and I heard so many students tell me this. I started to wonder, could these students have insulin resistance? And, I started measuring insulin levels in my students, and this will be no surprise to you, but some of their fasting insulin levels, I know we use different units here, but some of their fasting insulin levels were in their 30s or 40s when these, and when they really should be, well below 10. And this, so this process, this gradual development of insulin resistance at the blood-brain barrier can happen at a very young age. And they've shown there are these special scans, images of the brain called PET scans, where you can actually look at the glucose processing in the brain on an image. And they've seen low brain glucose, sluggish brain glucose processing in women in their early 20s who have insulin resistance. So this is a problem that it's never too early to start thinking about protecting your brain metabolism. And that sluggish brain glucose processing is not just about dementia. It's about, being able to think clearly and quickly. It's about being able to, not experience brain fog. It's about not being depressed. It's about having good stamina and productivity. The brain needs a constant supply of high quality energy to function at its best. And you deserve that. You deserve to know what that feels like.
Yes. We all deserve. It's a good term to say deserve, as opposed to, oh, you should, you all could, you all should. You deserve it. We deserve to have a fully functional body and brain and to live our best lives. Yes, and we can. Actually, we can. So, Georgia, in your book, you emphasize the concept of dietary neuroinflammation. What is dietary neuroinflammation, and what inflammatory pathways are activated by modern diets?
Yeah. So again, if we look at the processed foods, which are the staple ingredients, the signature ingredients of the modern diet, which are so unhealthy for us, it's not the red meat or the saturated fat. It's the refined carbohydrates and the refined vegetable oils, the factory carbs and the factory fats, right? So those ingredients, even though they come from whole foods, they no longer behave like food in the body. These are substances that create unnatural circumstances inside our body. So the one thing we've learned over the past 20, 30 years is that these chemical imbalances in the brain that we used to think were the cause of most mental health conditions, there are more powerful causes, there are more powerful drivers of mental health problems than chemical imbalances. And one of them is inflammation of the brain. So inflammation of the brain, a lot of people think of inflammation, oh, my wrist is red or swollen or sore, right?
Yes.
That's inflammation. The brain doesn't get red or swollen or sore because you can't see it. So you can't see it and it doesn't turn red. You can't feel it because it doesn't have nerve endings, right? And so you could have brain inflammation right now and really not be aware of it. But there are ways to look at brain inflammation in research studies. And what scientists have discovered is that most psychiatric conditions are associated with at least some degree of brain inflammation. And so, and it's not just if you fall and hit your head that this will happen, or if you have a viral infection of your brain, that of course that will happen too. Those are things that should cause brain inflammation, but most of us are eating in a way that causes brain inflammation 3 to 6 times a day, which are the refined carbohydrates. So the refined carbohydrates, the sugars, the flours, the cereals, the fruit juices, these naked glucose molecules that give these exaggerated spikes in your blood sugar, and those get transmitted into the brain. So the brain needs energy so much. It doesn't put up really any barriers to letting the glucose in. So if the higher the blood sugar, the higher the brain sugar. They're not identical, but they rise and fall together. And so if you've got high blood sugar, you will have high brain sugar. And that's not good, because the too much sugar in the brain will literally stick to vital molecules throughout the brain, including proteins and DNA strands, all kinds of other things, and cripple them into these sticky, dysfunctional, kind of caramelized clusters that don't work anymore. And those will set off these waves of inflammation as these cells called microglia that patrol the brain looking for problems. They'll see these clumps that are accumulating like trash on the sidewalk, and they'll say, okay, we need to clear these away. So they send for help, and they send for first responders, and they say, okay, we need to clear these clusters away. So they deliberately release inflammatory, what are called inflammatory cytokines, which are just first responding molecules to call for help, and oxygen-free radicals, reactive bits of oxygen to sound an alarm. So that's oxidative stress. inflammation and oxidative stress, it's just the immune response, the brain's immune response to dealing with this problem. Like, what are all these sticky clusters doing in the brain? Once they clear them away, there's supposed to be a healing phase. But again, most of us are eating refined carbohydrates up to 6 times a day. So you've got this chronic inflammation and chronic oxidative stress. And what that's doing is it's damaging the brain and damaging the brain's architecture, the actual structure of the brain. And it's also destabilizing many of the brain chemicals that we're trying to correct with medications. So it throws brain chemistry out of balance. Serotonin, dopamine, melatonin, GABA, and glutamate. And so many different neurotransmitters are affected. And now you've got damage and destabilization. And that's happening. Think about the way kids eat. That's happening all day long. And it's really quite dangerous.
This is scary. I have kids, 9 and 11, and the way they eat has really not much to do with the way we used to eat when we were kids. And look at us now, the adults, we have all those mental problems, physical problems. And yet when we were kids, we ate pretty much properly for the most of us, because ultra processed food wasn't all over all the time, super abundant in schools and all over the place. You know what I mean? So this is really scary that the young generations are already getting all this ultra processed food, all this insulin resistance, and these clusters in the brain. It's scary.
It is scary. And, kids in school, school kids are not nearly as healthy as they used to be. And, you can see it just by looking at them, but you also see it by talking to them. And, so when I was in college mental health, I was in college mental health for about 13 years. And even during that period of time, you could see that the incoming classes were getting less and less emotionally healthy. And they were coming into class the first year of school. Some of them already taking 2 or 3 psychiatric medications, some of them needing all kinds of special help and support to get through the day. And that, I'm not saying that that's their fault. It's really important to make that. I'm saying that A, they've got the wrong information about what a healthy diet is supposed to look like. And B, they don't realize that eating the wrong way isn't just, oh, it's going to hurt you in the future. Maybe it's going to maybe I'll gain weight, or maybe it'll hurt me in the future. It's hurting them right now. And so most people don't realize that they may not, if you're eating the wrong way, and this is going to sound like an exaggeration, but I think it is true. When you're eating the wrong way, you may not know who you actually are underneath all of that. So, people might think, you might think of yourself as an irritable person, or a sad person, or a person who doesn't get a lot done, right? Or a low energy person, right? Or a person, you might think of yourself as a sour person, or even not a very smart person, right? And so, or maybe you don't have a good memory. When you eat properly, you discover who you really are, like what you're really capable of. And again, I think everybody deserves to have that experience.
Your true potential as a human being. What about mitochondria? What role do they play in mood regulation, and how does diet influence their functioning?
Yeah, so mitochondria do many, many things. So they're inside, almost all of our cells have mitochondria, and lots of them. And they're known, they do many things, but one of them, the thing they're most famous for is making energy, of turning food molecules into energy. So if you eat carbohydrates, it'll break down to glucose, and glucose will get chopped in half, and then those pieces will get fed into the mitochondria, and the mitochondria will extract every little bit of energy they can out of them, and for your brain. If you eat fat, It will break down into ketones. The ketones will cross into the brain, and the ketones will be fed into the mitochondria, and the mitochondria will extract all of the energy out of the ketones, right? So they do many things, but that's one of the things that they're most famous for. If you overwhelm your mitochondria with too much glucose at one time, it will cause you'll get a lot of inflammation and oxidative stress, and that can damage the mitochondria, damage the inner workings of the mitochondria, and make it more difficult for them to function. And that's how you can get that sluggish brain glucose processing that we were talking about before. And so it's really keeping your mitochondria healthy is very important. And some of the ways you can do that is making sure you're feeding them all the molecules they need for all the machinery in their factories, all the vitamins and minerals and nutrients that they need to function properly. And the other thing you can do is make sure that you're giving them a break and not overwhelming them with too much glucose at one time, so that they are not going to end up being damaged. So another beautiful thing about a ketogenic diet is that it allows mitochondria to heal, and it even inspires the creation of brand new mitochondria. So that's another way that your brain energy production can be enhanced, is not just the mitochondria you already have will start working better, but you can even make brand new ones. And so you can have more mitochondria than you had before. And this is one of the benefits of staying on a ketogenic diet longer term, is that the longer you stay on it, the more healing can take place and the more benefits you can see. It's not always in the first few weeks. I mean, lots of people notice benefits in the first few weeks. On average, about 3 weeks is what it takes to start to see some good benefits. But the benefits can grow from there. And so it's again, people owe it to themselves to see what's possible if they really make a commitment to feeding their brain properly.
And the nutrients that are required for an optimal brain. You mentioned all of that. You explained that really well in the book. It's quite clear what we need to make sure we have in our diets through food or through supplements if it's complicated for us, if we have multiple intolerances or allergies, but you detail it really well and really properly in the book. So if anyone is curious about, okay, what actually feeds the brain properly so that it functions to its optimal capacity, please get the book and read the book. It's coming out in French, by the way, in France. It's in Europe in French. It's coming out April 24th. 2025. So yes, I'll just repeat the name one more time, but I'll repeat it again probably towards the end, which we're nearing the end. So in French, éditions Souccar, Nourrir son cerveau, soigner son mental, April 21st. You can already pre-order it. So I'd suggest everybody, if you care about your mental health or the mental health of your beloved ones, get that book and read it. It has the potential to change your life for sure. A few more questions if you still have time, Georgia.
Of course.
Okay. You critique the prolonged use of antidepressants. What biomarkers could help guide a nutritional approach rather than a pharmacological approach?
Yeah, so one of the things I really walk people through in the book is how to do kind of their own metabolic evaluation, right? And I really firmly believe that every person with a mental health condition deserves a metabolic evaluation. And it's really quite simple. Excuse me. And this is because metabolic problems are such common drivers of mental health conditions. And we're not taught that. Most people don't realize that if they improve their metabolic health, their mental health could also improve. But how do you know how good or bad your metabolic health is right now? How do you know? And so everybody, I believe, deserves a metabolic evaluation. And some of these tests are free. Some of them, most people have already had, and others of them are easy to obtain. So, and I spell these out in the book, but I'm going to tell you right now because I think they're so important. I want everybody to know whether they read the book or not. So So one of them is something called a fasting insulin level. And this is an inexpensive test. At least in the US, it's, you know, maybe $10, even if you don't use insurance to pay for it. And that, you know, usually when people are going to their healthcare provider to get a checkup, their annual physical, they're not usually going to order a fasting insulin level. They're going to order a fasting glucose level.
Yes.
And so, because what they're looking for is they're looking for type 2 diabetes.
Yes.
And a fasting glucose level will tell you whether or not you already have type 2 diabetes, because if it's too high, you've already got type 2 diabetes. So, but just like Alzheimer's disease, type 2 diabetes does not happen overnight. It's as you were saying, it's a very gradual process that happens over 10 or more years in the background. Your fasting glucose is going to be nice and low. It's going to stay nice and low for a long time because your fasting insulin is rising, is high to keep that glucose under control. Yes. So it's taking more and more insulin to keep that glucose down. So if you look at the glucose, you're missing the real story, which is how much insulin is your body having to pump out to keep that glucose in good control. So you don't just want a fasting glucose, you want a fasting insulin. Another test you want is yes, you can get your hemoglobin A1C, which shows you, your 3-month average, what your glucose levels have been like for an average of 3 months, the past 3 months. Remember, we were talking about those sticky caramelized clusters that happen in the brain if the brain glucose is too high. Well, the same thing happens in the blood. So hemoglobin A1C, all that is how much sugar has stuck to your red blood cells. And so the higher your blood sugar is, the more sugar sticks to those red blood cells. That's your hemoglobin A1C. It's your glycosylated hemoglobin, or your sugary hemoglobin. So, yes, you want to get that test, but that's still, not the best test. I think it'll tell you whether your glucose levels have been running too high over the past 3 months. But again, if you've got a lot of insulin coming out, that hemoglobin A1C could look perfectly normal. So what are the better tests? The better tests are the fasting insulin level. Another test is take your cholesterol panel, which you probably already had one, and look at it and try not to focus on the LDL. So the LDL cholesterol gets tons of attention, but it's the least important and least useful number on your panel. It's not completely irrelevant, but it gives you almost no useful information. What you want to look at is your triglycerides and your HDL.
Yes.
So, and are you agreeing with me?
Oh, yes, I agree with you.
Good. So that's going to give you much more powerful information about your metabolic health, the current, whether your diet is healthy for you, and what your future risk of a cardiovascular problem will be. So what you're going to do is you're going to look at those triglycerides and HDL, and you can divide the triglycerides by the HDL and look at that number. And so you really want it to be below 2, below 1.5 is even better. But a simpler way to think about it is you want nice low triglycerides and nice high HDL. So your triglycerides, you want to be less than 100 milligrams per deciliter in US units. And I think is that 1.1? What is that? Is it 1.1? I can't remember what it is in other units, international units.
I'm not sure which units are being used in France or in Europe in general. Sometimes they follow your units and sometimes ours. So maybe we'll have to put some text with that too, with conversion units.
Yeah, so in American units, less than 100 milligrams per deciliter. If they're higher than that, what that is usually telling you is that you're eating too much carbohydrate for your personal metabolism.
Exactly. And it's a personal threshold. It's not everybody is the same. So I hear all the time, Georgia, oh, but I eat so much less sugar than my husband. It's not a comparison. It's according to your threshold, your own tolerance of glucose molecules in your body. So you could have a very, very, very low tolerance and eat pretty low carb and still have high trigs. It really depends where you are at, right?
That's exactly right. And that's the power of these very simple tests, is they're personal. Yes. So I can't tell you without that test whether or without a continuous glucose monitor. There's another way you could look at it, whether the amount of carbohydrate in your diet or the type of carbohydrate in your diet is right for you. Yes. So only you can figure that out. And we can help you. We who have experience doing this can help you. But the reason why, it's kind of interesting, I've started to say it this way, is that if you're eating a high carbohydrate diet is a high fat diet in disguise. So if you eat too much carbohydrate, more than you can store, and we have very small storage spaces for carbohydrate in our bodies. If you're eating more carbohydrate at one meal than you can store or burn right away, every extra bit of that carbohydrate beyond what you can store or burn, your liver turns it into saturated fat on purpose and sends it out to the bloodstream to be stored in your body. Yes. That's what it's designed to do. It's only doing what it's supposed to do. So you can eat a zero fat diet, but if it's got too much carbohydrate in it, it's actually a high fat diet in disguise. And that's been a useful concept when I've talked to people who are really afraid to eat fat. And they really, gravitate towards, things like, crackers and whole grain breads and oatmeal, is they're worried about the fat. Well, if you're worried about fat, lower the carbohydrate.
Absolutely. Or if you're worried about the fat because you're worried about heart disease, you should worry about metabolic dysfunction. You should worry about insulin resistance and chronic hyperinsulinemia, because that will drive heart disease and brain disease, any disease of diseases of blood vessels, and diseases of nerve damage. So if you're worried about eating too much fat because of your heart, you should really worry about eating too much sugar, which will damage your heart in the long run, right?
That's right. And another really simple test that's free that people can do at home in the privacy and not even tell anybody if you don't want to, is just you measure your waist circumference. And if it's more than half your height, that's a clue that you most likely have some degree of insulin resistance. And so that's a simple one that everyone can do. So, those tests, they're really available to everyone. At least here in the US, like if your doctor won't order a fasting insulin for you, you can order it yourself from an online lab, and it's very inexpensive. So, and you can see for yourself, or you can get a continuous glucose monitor, even one lasting for 2 weeks, which in the US now, you have to get them in packages of 2, but they're available over the counter now. But they've been available in Canada and France without a prescription for a long time, I believe.
Yes.
And I don't know what they cost there. Do you know?
Well, I know about France, but in Canada, it's still quite expensive for 14 days. But that is, to be honest, that is if you see that as an expense, if you see it as an investment, something that will teach you about your body, your health, for your future and for your well-being now, but also for your future. It's really not a big expense, in my opinion. And a lot of people say, oh, it's expensive. Well, a manicure is expensive. Eating out at a restaurant is expensive, but it's an expense. If you get a glucose monitor just once for 14 days or for 2 weeks, it will teach you so much about your own biology, your own metabolism. It's an investment. Everyone should do it. Even kids should do it, but definitely every adult should wear at least once a continuous glucose monitor to understand how they react to food, to what they drink, how they react to stress, how they sleep. Do they wake up already with super high blood sugars, even though they didn't eat sugar the day before? How your body works. You will not learn everything from a continuous blood glucose monitor, but you will learn so much. I think you will thank yourself afterwards.
I love everything you just said, because I completely agree that I wish everyone could wear one, even kids, at least for 2 weeks. And it is an investment. And well worth it, and it's fun and interesting, and it's painless. I've worn one many, many times. You cannot even feel it going into your skin. Trust me. It's some people are afraid that, oh, I don't want a needle. It's not a needle. It's a flexible filament. You're not going to feel it, and it is just so fascinating to see not just how food affects your glucose levels, but how your stress affects glucose levels, and exercise, different types of foods, and your sleep patterns. All of the, and even time of day. So it's just like like a science experiment that you can do in the privacy of your own home. And then you can change your diet or not change your diet. It's up to you.
But at least you have data. You have data, you have knowledge, you have, okay, well, now I know what this does to me. What do I choose? What do I want? You know, you have data, and data is good to help you make changes. So it's not, well, my psychiatrist said I should, or well, my family doctor said I should because I'm pre-diabetic, but I don't know. Now you know, now you see, then you can decide, you can make better informed decisions, for sure.
Exactly.
Georgia, you mentioned detached psychiatry. This might be a bad translation. Maybe that's not the term you use, but a detached psychiatry that does not take into account the body into account. So a psychiatry, the practice of this area of medicine that doesn't take into account the rest of the body. It's basically all focused on the head, as if the body and the health of the body didn't matter. How can we evolve the DSM to integrate metabolism into diagnosis and to take it into account?
Oh, if I knew the answer to that. I wish I knew how to get metabolic health incorporated into the DSM. So for people who don't know what the DSM is, it's a very big, more than 1,000-page book. It's a diagnostic manual, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Psychiatric Disorders, or something like that. Anyway, every psychiatrist has one, and they're extraordinarily unhelpful. So it's a list of diagnoses and a list of symptoms for each diagnosis, but really the book doesn't tell you anything about what's causing the problem or what to do about it. So it's really just a very descriptive book, and so and we now understand that the research in this area is exploding in terms of understanding the metabolic drivers of poor mental health, and just about every mental health condition you look at can have a metabolic component to it that is really profound, and that you can influence by changing your lifestyle in these very simple, not easy, but simple ways. If you have the right information, you can improve the way